Alrighty, here we go. So now we're ready to do our seascape. We're going to paint it. And I have this one. This is actually the practice one I'd like you to practice on. And what we're going to do is we're going to take and we are going to do a wet on wet. So wet on wet means I'm going to add lots of water to this paper right here. You got to kind of move quickly. You can see it's saturating through the paper. And a wet on wet will allow for the paper to move the water. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the purple and I'm going to take some blue. And I'm just putting it where the water is, like it's really wet on here. And yeah, I went over the top of that edge there. That was a little crazy. Put some color down in here because that's that hole. The more intense colors I put, the darker it will be when it dries. So here's a little dried version where I did some really dark colors. You can see it stayed fairly dark. And I do, if sometimes if I'm not worried about it, I can actually add a little black. And I'm not uptight about black, so I throw a little black in here. And then what I'd like you to do is take, and I want you to take your the end of your brush, and I want you to drag it up and just barely pull a line through that background, and that will actually bruise the paper, and believe it or not, that will show up even more so. Right now it's not really showing up really well, but it will really show up later. While it is still wet like this, and this is very wet, I'll show you, it's super wet still. I'm going to take this salt and just take a pinch of it, and I'm going to just barely just sprinkle it into that area, trying not to get too much because the salt is going to create a really neat effect. Now if you put it on a dry area, it's not going to do anything, so it has to be dropped onto a wet area in the painting. Okay, I'm going to try to move this back up. Alright, now where all of this is wet, right here, I want to avoid painting in this area because this area right here will actually bleed into my sky. So I'm not sure that I want our sky. I mean, actually, in this case, it's underwater, so it'll bleed into my background, which I don't want to happen. So over here, I've already created on this wonderful palette that one of my students made last year, and then thankfully left it for me. I've been able to make 4 greens and 4 browns because you're going to be required to do 4 greens and 4 browns. What I have here is a yellow green, and then I have a orange green. This is orange and green mixed together, and this one's going to be the red and green, and that's got blue in it, so it's a blue green. And then here I've got I could have done it opposite, but that's my yellow brown. Then here's my red brown, my orange brown, and this one has actually blue in it. So this is a blue brown. It's going to be it's fairly dark. So the best way for you to see this color is for me to just lay down some. So I'm just going to lay it right here. I'm going to put it right here. That's the darkest brown I have. Then I have this one, which is my orange. Then I have this one, which is my red, and then this one, which is the yellow brown. And then I'll take my greens. Then I've got a yellow green. You have to have 4 different greens. Put some more yellow green there. This is the orange green. Red green. And then the blue green. So I have 4 different greens, and you can play with having all these colors, because that's what we kind of want to do. We want to have a lot of color to play with. All right, so what we're going to do is I can go with my yellow brown, and I'm going to skip that area right there, and I'm actually going to come down here and paint. Now, I've got one value of brown that I've just put on here. How can I make that value different? Well, all I have to do is add a little water, and I can lighten that value. So you can actually create a second value by simply lightening a color. Or I can actually use another brown. So I'm going to do my red brown right here. Maybe some right over in here in the shadow area. So I'm thinking about where those cross hatches are. That's probably where I'm going to put more shadow in. And then over here I've got the other color brown. I'm trying to avoid this little beautiful shell that I have drawn here. And while all that is drying up there, and I want to throw more salt on it. Boy, do I want to mess with that, but we're going to leave it alone. That's one of the things that I have trouble with, is leaving stuff alone. So you're going to have to learn to do it. Do as I say, not as I do, because I almost went up there, but nope, don't do it, don't do it. Avoid that. And so now I'm just playing with all my different browns, and I'm thinking about, like, where would the light be? And if I want this to appear as though it's dropping off, maybe I need to go a little darker right here in this shadow. Like maybe I need to drop this whole edge and make it a little darker brown. So I'm using that blue brown, which is really dark. And maybe a little mixture of maybe some of the other, kind of interlocking them in there. It definitely is appearing as more gray than brown in this light, but that's okay. And I'm going to maybe put some red brown in it right over here where the shadows might be deeper. Mixing them in. There's another one. Alright, so I would be playing with those colors, and I want you to consider, you see here I've got actual wells of colors. In the back of the room I have the back of these lids. They're just by themselves. You are welcome to go get a lid like this. They're all by themselves. They're basically a palette, and you can use that as a palette. And you know that I always have please do not mix in this lid in our actual sets, because if you have water in that, it'll dump out on someone or yourself. So we don't add water into that area on the ones that we're using in class. But you can actually have one of those little palettes and fill it with the colors like I've done here, and then you will have them when you come back the next day or the next 2 days later or a week later, because they will dry up, then you add water to them and they come right back. So when I go to use my greens now, I'll probably paint you know, a little green into my shadows. Where I might have a shadow plant. Maybe I'll make another one over here, and it has nothing to do with anything that's already been drawn. Throw some yellow green in one. And the more different colors you have, the more values you have, the more interesting this whole thing is going to look. That's the idea. We're kind of experimenting with color, and we're learning to paint and build up color. When all of this is done, the first day you're putting all your browns down, you're going to maybe play with your greens, and you might, and I really got this wet, so it's going to take some time to dry. The question you have to ask yourself is, how do I get this up off my table? So it would have been wise, if I were knowing that I had to leave, I can just leave this here now tonight, but you have to leave. So I would get an extra piece of paper. There's some paper over there by the sink, and you set it underneath, you paint on it, and then you take that to your drawer. That would be my suggestion, and then you don't have to move things. Now, I don't know what it is about this paper. Seems like I can't tell the difference physically, but when I painted on it just now, it was very translucent, more translucent than this paper, which was from years ago. And I'm confused by it. The only thing I can think is the quality is different. because here's what my salt did with this paper, which is much more intense. So I'm really hoping, I'm really surprised it's just not been behaving with this new copy paper that I have. So I may have to go to and buy some new copy paper so we'll have better results, because I have a feeling that we're going cheap here. Alright, so once you have all these, I'm going to just move this guy off, even though he's soaping wet here. Okay. And I want to look at what the next thing we could do. So here we are, and come back the next day. This is all dry, and we already have some browns. And so at this point, I could go back in and what we call glazing over. So I can do another color over a color we previously had. And I can also do another little fun thing. I can take, say, and mask off an area. So I just want to like not have anything there. And I can take a little bit of my color that's been mixed, never out of the actual container. We don't take color out of these containers here because that will damage them. But if you take a little color here that I've already mixed, notice this toothbrush is dry. This is a brand new toothbrush that was never used on any teeth, but basically I buy them by the bulk. And then I'm just going to turn it upside down and I'm just going to flick. So I'm flicking straight down on it. And I'm going to create the little stippled effect, and it's going to add to that look of rocks. And all of this can be done. You want to glaze over, you want to build up on top, and I'm trying to block it from going into any area by using this masking. And you can mask off other areas if you're worried about it going somewhere. But I always make sure that if I do clean out my brush, the toothbrush here, that I always make sure that I dry it off, because you do not want it sopping wet unless you want huge blobs. Then it just doesn't work as well. Okay, so when all is said and done and you've played with it, you're going to then, so this one already has some stippling, it's all dry, the shells have been painted, the blue greens have been added in here. This background has got some stuff going on. The salt has already happened. There's a yellow brown and orange brown back here, red brown in the foreground. The fish has been painting. Even his eye is still white, which is actually pretty amazing. Then you can throw in, and what you'll see here is this is called glazing, and it's basically glazing over where the fish was. And in this back area, the mid-ground, and it creates more of a look of water. So I've got, well, that's not really the one I wanted to have. All these have been done. Here's one. It's kind of not got too much on it. You want to glaze over. So you're going to take some of that blue, and you can just kind of glaze right over. You're just washing over areas. And you can still see the other colors through the blue. So it's just like that orange. You can just barely see it. You'll be able to see. And it just kind of puts that kind of water idea back there. It makes you think about it. Glazing it over, something like right here. Oh, too much. Know when to quit. There we go. That's better. And then allowing for the other color to show through and not completely getting rid of it, but just keeping some nice horizontal lines through there. And let's see, stipple is done on it. Let's look at, oh, this one's neat. Look at how here we painted in some lines. So it has that background yellow-green, blue, yellow-brown, and a little bit of green in it. And then it has like a brown line drawn through, and so there's actually some painted areas in here, so you could be painting stuff in here. There's a lot of blue in here overlapping the browns, glazed over. When you go to paint your fish, just do it a little bit at a time and wait for everything else to be dry. That's how you keep it from getting bled into. I think red, brown. This is all telling you blue water, wash over the brown when it's dry. We did the salt. We did basically we did not do a burst, but that's if you're letting paint kind of bleed into each other really badly. And here's the one. It's looking a little better. It's getting a little drier, and you can start to see the bruising. And that bruising is seen like in these lines. So anyway, I think it'll be fun to do. The more you experiment, the more interesting it'll be. You can play with painting individual scales, different colors. I could add detail to the shell. I mean, it's painted right now, but what if it needs a little more color? So I can add a little more color to it and change parts of it. Put a little detail there. I can add detail into this fish. Now everything is dry. I can go back in and touch in little details that can make a difference in the way this thing looks. So you're just going to build your color up. Watercolor is made to build color up. You start out with letting the color, the white paper show through the color, and then you slowly build on top. Anyway, I want you to have fun.